Welcome to Types of Controls, Standalone and Network Controls. We'll talk about standalone versus networked control systems and review some advantages and disadvantages of each. We'll look at the benefits of these different types of controls, and we'll also expand on other issues such as non-energy benefits when you use networked lighting control systems. We'll also talk about how you can develop complex control profiles and scheduling in network systems. And finally, we'll end with a review of an example fixture showing various different control options for the same fixture type. When we say standalone controls, what we mean are that devices control individual fixtures. And specifically, we're talking about non-networked components. So these are typically fixture-integrated devices, which are usually occupancy sensors and or photosensors. And this is a great example of a high bay type fixture showing an optional occupancy sensor that can be bolted onto the side of the housing as shown. This is a very standard option for a lot of fixtures these days. This is also true of interior fixtures such as troughers for use in office spaces and things like that. And by the way, most, if not all, exterior fixtures have their own sensors too. So same type of idea. These simply live with the fixture and control that individual fixture. They're not connected to anything else. Because of this simplicity, standalone controls are usually lower in cost than entire network lighting control systems. As mentioned, this is typically a standard option, not for every single fixture type, but for many. So when you check the specification sheets on a manufacturer's website, you will often see options for these. They're often, not always, but they're often pre-installed in fixtures, which makes the installation even that much simpler. Because they're associated with only the fixture in which they're mounted, there's no real vulnerability to hacking because there's no real system. And some of the disadvantages are that there are limited control strategies available and limited additional benefits that you can get when you use controls, but where they're only standalone, they're only controlling the fixture that they're in. So as mentioned, with standalone controls, typically those mean occupancy sensors or photosensors, or both. It may be possible to have some type of personal control for a fixture with standalone controls, but you need to check with the manufacturer. For example, in the past, there are manufacturers that have made controls components that allow you to communicate with them via an IR transceiver, which is something like a remote TV control. That's becoming pretty rare these days because these days people tend to use things like wireless systems with radios. But it may be possible. You have to check with the manufacturer. So the most important thing to keep in mind is that there are limited control strategies that you can use when these components are not networked in an overall system, and that will very likely lead to reduced energy savings and possibly lower occupant satisfaction. As defined by the Design Lights Consortium, NLC or Network Lighting Control Systems are the combination of sensors, network interfaces, and controllers that make these changes occur in the lights themselves. In terms of network lighting control systems, one of the big advantages is that they can typically allow for lots of different control strategies. Instead of just occupancy sensing or photosensing, which is common when they're standalone controls, once you network these components together, you can usually set other strategies such as high-end trim and scheduling, personal control, command response, and a bunch of other things oftentimes as well. And that has a lot of benefits that you cannot get from using standalone controls. We're going to talk about that in more detail on the next slide. terms of disadvantages, it's certainly possible that there will be a higher cost than just using standalone controls in individual fixtures. And remember that once you have a system, somebody will have to commission that system. They'll have to discover the components, figure out about how fixtures are zoned or grouped together, how they're scheduled, and how they behave. Keep in mind that different systems have different degrees of complexity for commissioning or even programming and operating. And in fact, in recent years, there's been a big change in the market so that manufacturers are creating systems that are way more user-friendly than older systems. And some of them can be commissioned by people with no prior experience whatsoever and no assistance from the manufacturer. In terms of benefits beyond just the typical control strategies that are all great and beneficial and provide lots of energy savings, once you use a network lighting control system, most, if not all, of these additional benefits are available. That will include energy recording and display, integration with other systems, networks, IoT, and so forth, a bunch of various non-energy benefits that we'll look at in greater detail. It will allow you to create zones or groups of fixtures, sometimes in complex arrangements that I would call nested zoning. They may allow you to create complex control profiles, or basically definitions of how things behave, and then scheduling to allow you to tell the system how you want things to behave at different times. They very likely will contain some method of fault detection and diagnosis. And then finally, they may also allow for remote access, which can be great for commissioning, programming, or troubleshooting. We talked about non-energy benefits, and these can be very, very valuable and beneficial features. So just as an example, there are a lot of these, but just as a quick example in terms of asset tracking, if you have Bluetooth beacons in every fixture, whether it's a Bluetooth control system or not, but if every single light fixture has a Bluetooth beacon in it, and everything that you want to track has a tag on it, you can immediately determine where that item is in your facility by looking it up. And using a lighting control system is a very good way to do this because lights are everywhere in a building, so it creates a very dense network of these Bluetooth beacons. This is an example of a schedule screenshot from a network lighting control system. And what you'll see is that there's a default profile which defines behavior that's active at any time unless you have a separate profile active that you've defined and scheduled as shown here. So for example, between 7 p.m. and 1 a.m. is what I've called the evening profile. From 1 a.m. to 5 a.m. I have what's called the overnight profile, and lights and control devices behave differently during those different blocks of time. There's also a special manual profile because these rooms required that. And other than that, wherever it's blank, it means that the default profile as shown above is active. So as an example of what you might look at when you're looking at specific fixtures on manufacturers' catalog sheets are usually pretty detailed sets of information. And in fact, this is actually a series of slides showing some of the 7 pages that are in this particular fixture. And this is pretty extensive documentation, so I applaud that. It's a lot to read through, but almost anything you would want to know about this fixture is in these 7 pages. And we'll look at the ones that touch on controls specifically. So the first page is just showing you a photo, some drawings with dimensional information, and then other features and specifications. On the second page, it actually shows you how to build a catalog number. And we're going to zoom in on the middle table. When we zoom in on that table in the middle of page 2, we'll see a lot of options for controls devices. So the second and third columns list those different options, and there are quite a few. So let's just go through this in a little bit of detail. Turns out that anything that's shown in one of the blue boxes in the second or third column is a component that's part of the control system that this manufacturer offers. And note that they offer both wired as well as wireless versions of these components. There's a lot of variations that do different things, so you'd have to take a good, careful look at this and read it through. If there's anything that you're not clear about, you'll need to discuss it with the vendor to understand exactly what they're offering in a specific component. This particular manufacturer has lots of different options that do different things, such as emergency versions of specific control devices, which you may need in a project. Down at the bottom is the one place on the sheet where they're listing what they're calling individual control. And when they say individual control, what they really mean is standalone controls, right? Remember that means controls that are integrated into the fixture, but they're not networked. So there's no wired or wireless connection to anything else. It's simply bolted into the fixture. It directly controls the LED driver in that fixture, and that's it. Notice that the first one says PIR integral occupancy sensor with automatic dimming control photocell. So this is really a combination occupancy sensor photosensor to provide both of those functions. On the fourth page, they show a bunch of options for both wireless and wired versions of this system. And it's becoming increasingly common for fixture manufacturers to show more and more detail about control systems that work with their fixtures, because they know that people in the market are using these more and more. So instead of forcing you to go back to a separate catalog to look at the control system and how that works, they simply incorporate some of that information on the fixture sheet like you're seeing here. So that's very convenient, because that means you don't have to go back and forth, and it's not a big giant research project. The likelihood is that the detailed information you need about how the controls work for this fixture are right here on the fixture cut sheets themselves, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. Again, there's a lot of detail here. It wouldn't take you long to skim over it and understand it, so I encourage you to take a look at this. Try it with one fixture and see how much detail is on it, and if you understand what they're telling you about how the fixture works with the controls. On the fifth page of this 7-page series, they actually have a lot of detailed information about sensor options, sensor coverage patterns, and even the sequence of operations for those sensors. So note that in the table, there are options for both network as well as standalone sensors. And you'd have to go through and figure out which sensors are available for which fixtures, right? Depending on which you choose, they may do different things, they may have different features, but it's a comprehensive table that works with all of the available options that we looked at previously. The sensor coverage pattern is important because you need to know that the coverage will be adequate for what you need in a given space. And then not only that, but notice that now it's very common to have specific sequences of operations built into the circuitry in the sensor or in the system. And that's what you're seeing listed on the bottom of the page. So this actually says, hey, when somebody walks into the room, turn the lights on, maybe to full, or maybe to a dimmed predefined level. At some point, they're going to turn down, they're going to dim down, not necessarily to full off, but then after a certain predefined period of time, they will turn off. So it's showing you how the components will actually behave, and that's very useful. Then on the 6th of the 7-page series, you'll see a listing of additional controls accessories for both wired and wireless versions of their network lighting control system. So this is showing a variety of switch and dimmer options and a variety of other controls options, sensors, and so forth, with more information about how that works. So this is a fairly detailed set of specification sheets, but don't be intimidated by that. If you're using a system or even standalone controls, you may very well need some or all of this detailed information. So here it is for you in one set of specification sheets. All you have to do is click on that fixture on the website, and it will bring you to these specifications, and you can read whichever ones are pertinent to your project. And thank you for watching this video on types of controls, standalone, and networked lighting controls.